Saltwater History, Wednesday night, episode 134. Richard, what's going on?
I'm very excited to be with you. I've been looking forward to this episode for a while as a distraction, a holy distraction to all the madness going on in the world, and as a diversion, a proper diversion away from the politics of our own country and native land here. We're not going to
Yeah,
talk a lick about it.
yeah. We were thinking about, should we talk about the new VP, everything that's going back and forth, potentially the craziest year of politics in American history with assassination attempts and president dropouts and still sitting presidents, but not really presidents. And then we're just not going to talk about any of it for today. And we're going to pretend like it doesn't exist until meanwhile in Oak Park at least, where it certainly does exist. But what do
Let's
you want
concentrate.
what do you want to talk
Let's
about
co
instead?
let's concentrate on the source of our joy, happiness, and mirth, both here on earth and then hopefully eternally in heaven, should we hold fast to the cross.
Where do you want to start?
The Transfiguration. Yesterday was the Feast of the Transfiguration, and I want to reflect upon what has been transferred about this amazing miracle disclosed to Peter, James, and John on Mount Tabor in the Transfiguration. It is the fourth mystery of the luminous mysteries of the Rosary. It is the most eponymous of those mysteries as it deals so much with light. And what we're going to talk about later when we talk about the life of a 15th and 16th century saint and Saint Cajetan is a reflection of, as was inherent and central in his instruction and preaching as a canon lawyer, as a civil lawyer, but ultimately as a brilliant and pious saint, is this clear distinction of light from darkness, goodness from evil, God from the nothingness of sin. And so we have this account of the Transfiguration. It's in all three synoptic gospels. Yesterday in the church, given the rotation of the readings, we are on the Gospel of Mark. It's a beautiful rendition and story. So here it is from Mark chapter 9, verses 2 through 10. Jesus took Peter, James, and his brother John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no fuller on earth could bleach them. Then Elijah appeared to them, along with Moses, and they were conversing with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus in reply, Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He hardly knew what to say. They were so terrified. Then a cloud came, casting a shadow over them. From the cloud came a voice. This is my beloved son. Listen to him. Suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone but Jesus alone with them. As they were coming down from the mountain, he charged them not to relate what they had seen to anyone, except when the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what rising from the dead meant. I've always loved the accounts of the Transfiguration, not simply because from when I was just a little kid, as far as I can remember and I recall about anything that I knew was true, beautiful, and good, and what I could consider my faith from the very earliest stages of my life and understanding of it, I always had a very high Christology. I always knew I didn't have to question that Jesus was God. And the Transfiguration is confirmation of that and in his glory. And confirmation so much so that the Father's voice echoes on Mount Tabor and indeed throughout the rest of creation when he says, This is my beloved Son, listen to him. Listen to him, the divine Logos, the second person of the Trinity, the ordering principle of all existence and all that is therefore good. And there he is as a man who also is transfigured before his chief apostles. And later on, when I was able to, as a Dominican, and then later as just simply a lay theologian and someone who just is a believer and loves and adores the the message of Scripture and Holy Writ, I loved providing exegesis on the Transfiguration. I would just want to share a few of the insights that I had from way back then and things that I feel are more than confirmed and very much consistent with our faith. Of course, the first thing that always hit me and was impressed upon me was the matching of the numbers of the figures, 3 and 3. It has a Trinitarian resounding theme, but on top of that, the 3 and 3, especially when we're talking about a proper understanding of ecclesiology, is that Jesus is clearly forming the church. This is the buildup of the church with Peter as his rock and as his successive vicar, and then James and John, who are going to serve as, and already are serving as, apostles to lead the body of Christ to salvation, just as Elijah and Moses were the key figures, Elijah as prophet, Moses as lawgiver, and then Christ as the head, right? So you have this confluence, if you will, the meeting in essence, what happens in and on Mount Tabor there is the fulfillment of the Old Testament in what's going to be the new, and is what is being constituted of the new in salvific history. I love how Peter's response is, as you might suspect, I love that line that Mark says he hardly knew what to say. And that conveys to me that at some point, Mark conversed with Peter about this, or with someone very close to Peter about this, because Peter's conveying how he felt seeing this, and he's recounting this as Jesus commanded after the resurrection. And the drama of at the end when Jesus commands them not to say anything until the Son of Man has risen from the dead, and then they Peter, in a lot of humility with James and John, are sitting around saying, "Yeah, remember we were saying what the heck does rising from the dead mean? What does that constitute?" They had just seen that. That's what's the altogether incredible. They're awestruck by the brilliance and the light that's just divinely emanating from Christ at the Transfiguration. Then they hear the voice of the Father, and that had, obviously they were blown away by all of that, so taken aback, so astonished, so utterly moved that they didn't know what to think, do, or say. They're inert, awestruck, all of those things. And so, out of respect, I've heard a lot of exegesis about this, about how Peter was wrong to say, well, let's build a tent here. There should be a tent and a shrine here, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. And how can you blame Peter for saying something so reverent? Now, some would argue that he's equating the three rather than understanding Christ to be the divine second person of the Trinity and Godhead and Messiah. But we have to remember the incredible heights at which the Jewish people held Elijah and Moses. These were two of the few people, you could name them on a hand, who did not pass into hell or did not pass into Sheol prior to, and they were lifted up to heaven directly, taken up in whirlwinds as Elijah was into heaven. So of course, there's some dispute among theologians as well, but prior to the resurrection, are Moses, Abraham, and Elijah, are they living in a type of super Sheol maybe perhaps an Eden-like paradise that's not the completion of what had to be fulfilled on the cross and through Jesus' resurrection. I tend to side with that a little bit. They're certainly, though, they're not in the realm of Sheol or that realm of sort of liminal hell, wherein, for example, Adam and Eve and maybe the patriarchs and judges um, and those prophetesses, for example, Ruth, Esther, and the like, were located. Yeah. Therefore, it's altogether the more amazing that what's being clearly conferred here is authority upon Peter and James and John. And it doesn't just stop with Peter becoming the vicarius Christi, the vicar of Christ, but rather James and John, uh, James and John assuming those authorities of Moses and Elijah within the church as prophet, as also lawgivers. And when we're talking about the authority of the church emanating down through the apostles and through apostolic succession as the Holy Spirit continues to enliven and vivify the church, that's what's being conferred. So that what Jesus is doing in the Transfiguration is arming them for what they're about to see. Because what they're about to see, particularly John is about to see, is the opposite of the glory of the Transfiguration. He's stealing their metal in the most perfect and divine of ways. What some of your thoughts, Charlie, on the Transfiguration?
The first thing that comes to mind is that last verse, how it's just one sentence in the Bible. They don't know I don't know what the exact quote, but they don't know what he meant by rising from the dead. That's just one sentence in the Bible, but I can imagine them perhaps on the walk back to wherever they were coming from, or nights later for hours talking back and forth about what did he mean by that? And that's sticking with them for a much longer time than we can even imagine by it just being one sentence. I think that's something that would probably really stick with someone for a long time. And to just the idea of Peter and John debating about what he meant by that is kind of funny to me. And it's just, there's something cool about that.
Yes, and then there is a later contrast as, James was thrown from the parapet of the temple in his martyrdom. So he's killed by the Jews. If he's in a sense the successor of Elijah as the prophet, right? He's thrown from the parapet, whereas Elijah was taken up from heaven. So what the Transfiguration also drives home is that Elijah was rescued after he shared his revelation, the revelation of God as prophet, in a whirlwind and ascended into heaven. In many ways, but again, and remember, Elijah's central preaching was against the Jews and their tendency and penchant to worship the Canaanite god Baal. They had this, the Israelites are always falling into this weird attraction and inclination toward worshiping the local Canaanite, Philistine gods, whoever's around, the Assyrian gods later, whoever they are. And yet, once the resurrection transpires, James remains as if not more resolute because he's seen, as now Elijah also has seen, the fulfillment of our salvation and the triumph of life over death, the resurrection over the death and the humiliation, the crucifixion. James is led to the parapet. By the way, it's thought that he was led to the same parapet in the temple that the devil took Jesus during the temptation. the fourth parapet or wall. I can't remember exactly what the locale is. And so his rejection is very much in line with how the Jews rejected Elijah and then Elisha, his servant and his then successor. And then James does the same thing, except notice the contrast. Elijah is taken up to heaven. James falls to his death, but the contrast there is so amazing. The juxtaposition, in many ways, his fall is his ultimate elevation and glory in heaven. What he was always meant to do, bear witness, martyroi, to martyr, to be martyred is to bear witness. Martyr means witness to the ultimate truth that he saw on Mount Tabor. He saw it in the Mount of Olives too. Notice that, of course, Peter and James and John are also with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane in the agony in the garden prior to the crucifixion. So they have a front row seat, if you will, to these the polar opposite experiences, at least from our senses. The glorification and humiliation of the Son of God. And notice, of course, it's through his humiliation, as Isaiah says, that we are brought into new life and elevated into the Godhead. Today's feast is of a saint who recognized the beauty of this quite well. And it's Saint Cajetan, who is the founder of the Theatine order in Italy in the 15th and 16th centuries. Why I love this beautiful coincidence of the Transfiguration falling on the liturgical calendar on this calendar on the 6th, and then St. Cajetan's feast day on the 7th, is because what Cajetan lived throughout his life, and I'm going to share some biographical notes about him in a moment, but what he lived throughout his life was a what he found quite consistent, namely that he was to do and give his life to service. He would eventually found a hospital for invalids and those who were poor and destitute in Italy. And then also through his scholarship, try to elevate those minds who are capable and with who or for whom enough opportunity was granted so that they could read and understand really complicated subjects of scriptural exegesis, theology, philosophy. There was work as a canon lawyer and as a theologian. He was also a bishop. He just served the church with his entire life. So let me just share some biographical notes on him. Had you heard much of Cajetan before
No,
we decided to bring him up today?
no.
Okay. So he was born in 1480, and as a result, he lived in a time in the church of great and transformative change. We're talking about the dawn of the Reformation. And prior to the Reformation, he worked for, of all people, Pope Julius II, who was the epitome of the Renaissance Pope. It was Pope Julius, of course, who commissioned Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling, as well as create eventually what would be the tomb of Julius. And it was initially going to have, it was going to be the most ornate papal tomb ever. And Michelangelo was going to do all of the sculpture, all of the statues adorning it. It was going to have all 12 of the apostles featured. But his work in the Sistine Chapel was so arduous and painstaking and time consuming that he just left it as Moses. And it's Michelangelo's famous Moses that is actually the entry statue for the tomb of Pope Julius. So this is a time of immense change. So Cajetan, he was called to the papal court. He requested removal at various points because he wanted to find, and he did eventually found a hospital for incurables in Vicenza, which was something of his hometown, in 1522. He established a hospital in Venice as well by 1523, so within a year. He went on to after devoting much of his time to the spiritual and physical healing of those who are suffering from ailments in the hospitals, he joined and was very much committed to creating this thing he called the Oratory of Divine Love. And he created this in Rome itself. And the idea was to form a group that would combine the spirit of monasticism with the exercises of active ministry. Now, why that hits home to me is because the reason I chose way back when to become a Dominican was because Dominicans pride themselves as being, in essence, monks in action. That the Dominicans take the fruit as Saint Dominic, and then the prominent Dominicans later on, whether they be Jordan of Saxony, Thomas of Cajetan, that those are two different people, by the way, Saint Cajetan, Thomas of Cajetan, Thomas Aquinas, and even in our own sort of time, Reginald Garrigou Lagrange, or the great Dominicans of more modern era. The good ones, themselves on taking the fruits of contemplation and prayer and bringing them out to inform and, in many ways, just direct, as a maestro would direct a symphony, the way we integrate or work within the world, and then take the intentions of and frustrations, but also the joys, uh, the thanks, the sufferances that might be put upon us for people as we fast or what have you, and act within our active lives, and we take those to prayer. So it's this dynamic back and forth between active and contemplative life. So this is really what he wanted to do. He founded a new order called the Theatines. It was named after the city of Chieti, which is in Latin Theate, and they grew very quickly. Cajetan was eventually tortured by mutinous soldiers of Charles V who had invaded Rome. He managed to then escape to Venice. He met with Saint Jerome Emiliani, excuse me, and he helped establish yet another congregation. What I found interesting as part of our works within Cajetan life is that he worked very assiduously and knew from a lot of the scholarly work that was going on in places like, oh gosh, what's the university in Spain that I'm forgetting right now? Oh my gosh. Well, I can't believe I'm forgetting the name of the university, but that the uh a lot of priests were working, and scholars were working in economics at the time. And as a result, he took interest in all of these things, and he formed what ultimately was a bank to help the poor. So we would think this as microfinance. And what I find so interesting about this is that Cajetan did not explicitly condemn usury. There was just a guest on Dellingpole's podcast who's a Protestant, and he was railing against the Church of Rome and all these things, and the churchification of Christianity, as if there's Christianity without the church. But uh,
Is that what he said?
oh yeah. So then, so yeah, I think his name's
The
something Williams.
churchification?
Yeah, or yeah, he was railing against how organized institutions had taken over Christianity and from its purest form. Okay, well, well, we could get into that in another episode, but that's just historically and verifiably false. But what he did was, why I brought this up was because he was railing against how usury was never, even Christ condemned usury. And despite the fact that there are parables about the lending of the talents and stuff of that nature, his own exegesis, again, this guy is just, well, he always condemned usury, and usury is unfair. It's that's what the Jews did, so that that's a sign of their perfidiousness. Well, okay, so we have the example of a saint in Cajetan who understood quite well the notion of time preference and capital accumulation and deployment, uh, and reserve and saving. So, and that there should be a monetary reward or compensation for that time delay if you should elect for low time preference. So he founded this bank, and yes, he condemned usury in the sense that it was high interest or exorbitant interest, especially the poor, but he also used allowed for usury within this bank that he organized. This bank that he founded later became the still extant Banco di Napoli, the Bank of Naples. So whereas this guy on Delingpole, I forget his last name was Williams, I think. I could look it up, but was railing against capital. He, of course, this guy was like seemed pretty anti-capitalistic and how free markets are the bane of Christianity somehow. I wish James would have pressed him a little bit more on that, because they just don't know the history of how the church defended and in many ways created capitalism, and recognized it as the most efficient economic system. That why was it so efficient and prosperous? Because it was what God had ordered us and ordained. Of course, within the scope of that, we have to act morally and not defraud or lie or steal or cheat, which are all antithetical to the proper functioning of free markets. Anyway, I'm getting into Gary North's book on the 10 Commandments and how it works within free markets and human freedom, the exercise of human freedom. So why Caj? I thought that was a neat kind of tie into what we do here, understanding the beautiful synergy and confluence of Catholicism in its faith, its social teaching, and also if you really boil it down or drill it down, of course, and the advocacy of free markets and human freedom and flourishing. Then beautifully too, with Cajetan, I looked at the Office of Reading selection, the second reading in the Office of Readings, and we have this immensely important and I think edifying and eloquent too excerpt from the Epistle of Barnabas. So I'm going to hand this off to you so you could read this excerpt on the today's feast day of St. Cajetan. It very much embodies what Cajetan, how he lived his life, and how through his example he glorified God. God was glorified in him, and he in God. So the Epistle of Barnabas here.
The Epistle of Barnabas. The way of light is this: if any man wants to journey to his appointed home, then he must put his whole heart into his work. To aid our steps on the road, illumination has been given to us as follows: love your Maker, fear your Creator, glorify him who redeemed you from death. Be simple in heart and rich in spirit. Shun the company of those who walk in the way of death. Hate all that is not pleasing to God. Hate all hypocrisy and never desert the commandments of the Lord. Do not proclaim your own importance, but keep a modest and humble mind. Do not seek to cover yourself in glory. Make no evil plans against your neighbor. Keep away from the sin of presumption. Love your neighbor more than your own life. Do not procure abortion. Do not commit infanticide. Do not withhold your discipline from your son or your daughter, but teach them the fear of God from their childhood onwards. Do not covet your neighbor's goods, or avariciously hold on to your own, avariciously hold on to your own. Do not cultivate intimacy with the great, but keep company with humble and virtuous men. When tribulations come upon you, receive them as you would receive good things, seeing that nothing happens without God. Do not equivocate or speak in double meanings. A double tongue is a deadly trap. Share your goods with your neighbor and do not insist that they are yours alone. For if you are sharers in that which is incorruptible, how much more must you be sharers in that which is corruptible? Do not be in a hurry to speak, for the tongue is a deadly snare. Keep your soul as pure as you can. Do not be someone who stretches out his hands to take, but keeps them tight shut when it comes to giving. If anyone expounds the word of the Lord to you, love them as the apple of your eye. Keep the day of judgment in mind, day and night. Seek the daily company of the people of God, either laboring by word of mouth, by going among them, exhorting them and striving to save souls by the word, or laboring with your hands, earning a ransom for your sins. Do not hesitate to give and give without grumbling. You will discover who can be generous with his rewards. Keep the commandments you have received, adding nothing and taking nothing away. Hold evil in detestation. Make your decisions fairly and uprightly. Do not cause quarrels, but rather bring together those who are in dispute and reconcile them. Confess your own sins. Do not set about prayer when you have a bad conscience. This is the way of light.
I love that because it's an explication and one that was contemporaneous. The Epistle of Barnabas is contemporaneous with the writing of the later Gospels. Scholars put it anywhere between 70 AD and 132 AD. With that, we have this beautiful explication of the Ten Commandments and how living them out in humility and through these instructions brings temporal joy and mirth and fulfillment, but also is the road to heaven. And I love his unflinching instruction about stay away from people who are double-tongued. Stay away from the impious. Stay away from the vicious. There's a lure there. But if you act in virtue, if you act in faith, hope, and love, then your example, very much like Cajetan's, shines through. And with very few words, or with words that are sparing but strike to the heart of matters, then with that example, you can lead people to, or be a conduit or a beacon or a light to someone who might be otherwise graced but struggling in their own temptations, sins, transgressions, as we all do. I love that line, confess your sins. So there's where I'm at with the Epistle of Barnabas. What's your take here?
It reminds me of one of my favorite chapters, Romans 12.
But Romans 13, Charlie.
Romans 12, it reads a lot like this.
Yeah,
Big emphasis on humility.
very much so. And how many times do we talk about, even when we're speaking not precisely of our faith, but just in our work here, about the necessity of putting yourself in the proper position in terms of the chain of being, ontologically, in terms of our essence, where we should stand. If you elevate yourself too much, that's ruinous. If you degrade yourself to the status of slave or beast, then, as Christ says, you can't serve two masters. How essential humility is, and a proper sense of oneself, our capabilities and limitations. Otherwise, everything else is just bears out frustration and other vices, including the ones that Barnabas warns about in the epistle: enmity, jealousy, envy, avariciousness. He spoke of, yeah. And also the epistle of Barnabas and these, yes, they're not deemed as canonical, but early codices of the Bible and collections of those letters, for example, the epistles of Paul, that would be included within the canon by the church, by the way. This was attached. This was often added at the end. The epistle of Barnabas was one, and you can see why. Like the Didache, it has these beautiful and faithful Orthodox instructions about the way to peace. It's often, by the way, this epistle of Barnabas is written in the style of a Jewish midrash, which is a commentary on scripture and instruction and exegesis on scripture by authorities. And Barnabas is a follower of Paul, has certainly has some insights here in authority. Do you want to talk about a town that doesn't recognize its ontological position very often?
I would love to.
Okay.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
Should we go to your gay suburb now?
The people segment. Meanwhile, in Oak Park. Got a couple good ones today. Trustees refinance $1.3 million in housing loans for the OP Residence Corporation. The OPRC helps provide.
They must be, I'm sorry, but to interject here, they must be refinancing at a higher rate. How are they obtaining lower rates than they once had? Unless they obtained these loans in 2009 or, well, I shouldn't say that, in 2017. Okay, well, we'll see. Forgive me.
The OPRC helps provide low and moderate income housing. Oak Park trustees have resubordinated more than $1.3 million in village housing loans for the Oak Park Residence Corporation, a local housing provider. OPRC is refinancing 8 loans it holds with the village for 5 of its properties. Refinancing these loans, according to village officials, quote, will help OPRC continue to provide housing affordable to households with low to moderate incomes, a priority for trustees. Trustees have been working to further housing goals outlined in the 2014 goals and in the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus housing study presented earlier this year.
Hold on. It just so happens this is where my finance background could come into help a little bit here. All of these financial mechanisms or instruments that are being deployed, whenever you see affordable housing units being built and the like, just think gigantic federal subsidy, because all of this is to the advantage of people who buy into often accredited, very wealthy and sophisticated investors into direct participation programs and real estate direct participation programs. And then they're able to, what's never mentioned here is that these investors in these programs are able to gain tax deductions because their expenditures and projects happen to have the title and affixation, if you will, the label of low and income housing, which is just subsidized by federal programs, state and local federal programs as well.
According to village officials, this decision allows the OPRC to access up to $4 million in financing to rehabilitate existing buildings through bank lines of credit. Trustees did not change the terms of the village's loans with the OPRC.
So wait, if they didn't change the term of the village's loans, how is this a refinance? They're just getting, it's just another loan on top of it's just additional capital at the same rate. That's okay. Sorry.
You don't need to apologize. I think you're getting to something. The possibility of additional funding could also let the OPRC improve or invest in the corporation's existing buildings, village officials said. The OPRC owns and manages 32 multifamily buildings, or nearly 700 rental units, according to its website. Quote, our primary mission is to promote Oak Park as a diverse and economically balanced community by providing high-quality multifamily rental housing at reasonable rates for households of all income levels, OPRC officials wrote. According to village officials, an OPRC provided analysis stated that more than 99% of its units in 2023 were affordable to those earning less than 70% of the area median income, and almost 10% of OPRC units were found to be affordable for those earning less than 50% of the area median income.
And what's these general terms are absurd. Affordable to those earning less, the median income. Well, what's the median income in Oak Park? Essentially, wouldn't these be just your average people who would, in an otherwise unaffected or uninfluenced, if you will, housing market, unmediated by the government market, would just actually rent the apartments without all of the tax subsidies? Anyway, in other words, what I'm saying is, if you're making 50% of the median income of Oak Park, of Oak Parkers, well, then why wouldn't you just be able? It's not as if there's a lack of apartment buildings in Oak Park. So, I mean, maybe available ones, but there's not a lack of them in terms of what could be available. And if you build more, there'd be more availability. Well, why wouldn't you just, without all of the designations of lower income housing, which is just, by the way, again, a kind of scheme for wealthy people to get these tax deductions in these direct participation programs. Well, why wouldn't you just let the free market orient people to where they could afford housing? This is all just the zoning and it's just interventionism. That's all it is. It's interventionism, and it has this kind of smiley face aura about it, saying, well, it's all for low and middle income housing. That it doesn't mean anything. It's a designation without distinction.
The village is resubordinating the 8 loans to Hinsdale Bank and Trust. For the loans, which total $541,000, come from the village's resolving loan fund, funded with community development block grant dollars. These loans were intended to help, quote, support the acquisition, rehabilitation, and ultimately resale of the properties once stabilized. Now the OPRC is trying to hold on to properties to provide more affordable housing, so this loan has been resubordinated or extended several times. The loans are now due December 31st, 2026.
So this is a resubordination. This isn't necessarily a refinance.
Right. Because it's the same terms.
Correct.
Which you talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
3 of the loans, totaling $29,533.33, come from the Multifamily Housing Incentive Grant Program, financed by the village's general fund. The loans will be forgiven at the end of a 3-year period, estimated to be May 15, 2026.
This almost 30,000 loan, which amounts to 90,000 total, these 3 loans, I assume that these are just on.
No, just 3 of the loans totaling
come from the Multifamily Housing Incentive Program. I can't. How do you even follow all this? Finance. So does that mean that there are 3 units of multifamily homes, each receiving $30,000 in loans? Because otherwise, that grant program doesn't do very much.
So my guess is it's not 90 grand, like you were saying. 3 of the loans totaling 29,000
okay,
come from the Multifamily Housing Incentive Grant Program.
What $29,000 doesn't do anything. 29 million.
The loans will be forgiven at the end of a 3-year period too.
I have no idea what this writer is trying to explain.
One other loan for $750,000
that makes a little bit more sense.
Comes from village housing bond funds. According to village officials, this loan comes from a village plan to acquire and rehab 20 PRC apartment buildings. The loan is due April 3rd, 2031.
Of course, the village is paying interest on that until that year, and then has to pay the principal at maturity.
Right, but it's the same, but they get locked into
terms.
the same terms.
Yes.
Must be nice.
Yes. Must be nice.
Village plan to acquire. So the village is going to acquire 20 of these multi-unit buildings.
And we know how well government's going to run those buildings.
Yeah.
Tragedy of the commons. Tragedy of the commons every time.
Second one.
Yeah. Can you imagine if you weren't doing a segment like this on your podcast and you sat down to read this paper and you had to read through that, you'd be like, why am I wasting? This is such an utter waste of my time. You have
there are people who read this unironically.
Right, but then they have to feign that they know what this actually means.
Well, many of them have to accept the fact that they live in this area.
Yes, but is that not kind of a conceit in and of itself? Because you're reading, let's say the 100 or so people who are residents of Oak Park who read through that with a level of gravitas and sincerity and seriousness. Let's say 4 of the 100 actually know what the hell the terminology is and what's going on there, right? But the conceit at the end would have to be among the other 96 especially, but let's take the whole 100. You just nod your head and say, I'm okay with all of this going on in my village. And I'm okay with the open public larceny of my tax funds, whether they're federal, state, municipal, whatever they are, in order to finance all of this. To what benefit of the taxpayer? You just kind of nod your head and say, oh, it's all for the greater good.
What did they say? They want to promote Oak Park as a diverse and economically balanced community by providing high quality multifamily rental housing at reasonable rates for households of all income levels.
But they're not really doing that because all of the subsidy that has to go in to pay and make up for the differential between what the renter can pay.
That's way too much thinking.
Okay. And the actual cost of the
way
housing.
too many brain cells going.
Okay. But I want to emphasize that when you see these things like historical district financing and the like, behind them are a swath or cadre of investment bankers, sometimes hedge funds, but very wealthy accredited individuals who know how to manipulate these governmental and federal programs. And eventually they see both capital appreciation and income, very, very, by the way, guaranteed income streaming in. And then on top of it, because the law is written in such a way in terms of financing these programs, they get huge tax deductions on these things. And they're only really beneficial for individuals and entities that are falling under the punitive progressive highest tax brackets. That's what they're about. This is all a charade. It's kabuki theater about wanting economic diversity. You want economic diversity, allow for example, all of these controls and all of these interventions to go by the wayside. Stop requiring all of these stupid, insane regulation requirements in your village. How about this? Stop having 50,000 parking signs and regulations everywhere so people could actually travel freely and commute and engage in commerce in your village as their residents as well. But they're not going that way because they love the interventionism. They have the ontological conceit that they can be the people in the control towers and direct all of these exchanges and this cooperation, but they're just in the doing the polar opposite. They're choking it off. Didn't think we were gonna get that much into that one, huh? Did you?
I did not. OPRF set to release plan addressing anti-Semitism accusations by the start of the school year.
Oh boy.
The plan
Oh,
comes
they
after
pistol Barnabas.
the plan comes after a year of internal strife, a formal complaint with the state, and a teacher's resignation.
Ooh, drama.
Oak Park and River Forest High School is set to release new plans that address accusations of anti-Semitism in a little more than 2 weeks, officials said. The goal is to have them complete by the time teachers and students return to campus. The plans, which are not final, will be released to the school community before they are made public, officials said. Okay. Released to the school community before they are made public. As if you couldn't just share it. Who's the school community?
Yeah.
Details about the plans were not immediately available, but they would address acknowledging problems and work to bolster the quote, safe, welcoming environment OPRF fosters, said Superintendent Greg Johnson. Since the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel, OPRF has grappled with balancing the messaging, activities, and interests of both pro-Palestinian and pro-Israel students and teachers. The resulting war, the strong local emotions regarding it, and the power of social media together have pushed the district to understand how to live out its promise of inclusivity in this context.
Yeah.
Critics, some who acknowledge the district has taken some steps to remedy the strife, say officials have not gone far enough. In the latest development, Michael Soffer, a veteran history teacher, resigned, citing anti-Semitic culture at the high school. A respected teacher who served OPRF for 17 years, Soffer created the school's Holocaust Studies and Genocide Studies course following the mass shooting at Pittsburgh's Tree of Life Synagogue. According to Chicago Tribune, Soffer also cited anti-Semitic graffiti found outside of OPRF's building and, quote, hate speech graffiti found inside a bathroom, along with an incident of a 14-year-old boy airdropping an image of a swastika as part of the motivation to bring this course to OPRF. In his resignation letter obtained by Wednesday Journal, Soffer said that despite numerous conversations with administrators, the district did not go far enough to address his concerns.
What did they
Quote,
want? What did this guy want them to do?
We're going to find out. Quote, the continued toll of anti-Semitism at OPRF and the district's lack of response to the anti-Semitism and lack of support for Jewish students, parents, and teachers created an untenable climate, Soffer said. He said the last few years have been, quote, incredibly trying.
Here it comes.
Soffer did not respond to requests for comment by publication. According to his LinkedIn profile, he is now a history teacher at Lake Forest High School. Johnson told Wednesday Journal that the district is sorry to see Soffer leave, but added that they know he will serve his new district, quote, just as well as he served his students at OPRF.
Until someone says Heil Hitler, and then he's out of there.
Quote, last year was incredibly challenging for many of our Jewish students and faculty members, and it pains us to know that what transpired has caused such a valued educator to leave the school, Johnson said. According to Johnson, Soffer is the sole former employee who has cited anti-Semitism as the reason for their departure. In late June, more than 100 people filed a complaint against OPRF D200 and 3 teachers with the Illinois State Board of Education and the Illinois Attorney General's office. The signers, led by Oak Park parent Nate Melman, alleged that the 3 named teachers, quote, demonstrated unprofessional conduct as well as promoted and condoned anti-Semitic statements and or acts. They pointed to one teacher's social media accounts that they said contained posts with anti-Semitic comments and those that promoted, quote, anti-Semitic falsehoods.
Then why don't you go and confront the teacher? Make an argument as to why their assertions are inaccurate, false, misleading, what have you, but they never do this.
The complaint also listed the Middle Eastern and North Africa club advisors, stating they have, quote, endorsed the October 7th terrorist attack on Israel and promoted a, quote, one-sided viewpoint in the classroom, posted anti-Semitic posts on social media, and sold t-shirts that depicted the entire outline of Israel next to the word Palestine, symbolizing the elimination of the state of Israel.
Oh, but it would be okay if the Jewish student came in with an Israeli flag t-shirt? Though, come on.
What do you mean by
The
that?
one-sided nature of this. What's that?
What do you mean by that?
Well, my point being here is that they're complaining about everything being one-sided, when in reality, if they were to just flip it on its head, and would these people be complaining if there was like the Sofer guy? By the way, the Sofer guy was able to introduce an entire class on Jewish history and struggle in the Holocaust, right? Well, I'm almost I would give you I will say with 100% certainty, if someone was to introduce like the North African or Middle Eastern club advisors, got teachers together and said, let's have a class on the history of the Nakba, or of the Storm Gang, or of the one that course that features the Israeli attack on the USS Liberty, right? Or how about the fact that the United States keeps fighting Israel's wars as the big bully proxy? No, they wouldn't allow a course like that. So don't hit me with the whole one-sided thing. We understand. In other words, what's clear is that the problem that these Jewish individuals affiliated with the school have, parents, teachers, is that it's been one-sided for so long, and now there's other dialogue challenging the narrative. So they're just going to complain and pout and quit and leave, and then lead lawsuits or complaints to try to defame and dox and all these other things, the people who are challenging the narrative. I mean, again, why couldn't I say, oh, and by the way, would they, if a Ukrainian student came in, yeah, the Ukrainian student came in and had not that they would, or that they even know about this, but they had a map of Crimea and they put Ukraine on there. Is that immediately anti-Russian? How would the Russian students feel about that, especially if they have relatives living in Sevastopol or something? So it's always this constant, unrelenting preferential treatment that Jews want in their communities. Enough of it. Enough. Make an argument, stand your ground, be as adamant and forceful as you possibly can in making your case. Otherwise, quit the bitching and constant moaning all the time, especially as you have this Zionist cult of a state that's engaged in genocide, and then now you're, oh, we're so maligned here because there's a group of students that put Palestine over the map of Israel. All right. Well, by the way, if there's such a number of those kids and members of the community that are doing that, well, then how successful was this guy Sofer's class? It was an utter failure, wasn't it? To convince people of the alternative history. I mean, no wonder the guy quit. He must have looked in the mirror and said, I'm a horrible failure.
Melman told One State Journal community members attended multiple Board of Education meetings to report incidents and follow up with the district. According to the complaint, quote, virtually no remedial action was taken. At the July 11th board meeting, Johnson said that the district remains steadfast in its efforts to balance the rights of all by seeking advice from community and religious leaders. Johnson also said the district sought legal counsel and has been consulting with their attorneys to ensure district policies are properly followed. According to Johnson, quote, enhancements to better support D209 community members affected by the events have been suggested, and that the district will share those actions once details have been finalized. Quote, as we prepare for the coming school year, we will continue to work hard in both visible and, oh my gosh, they did not just say in both visible and invisible. Hold on. Quote, as we prepare for the coming school year, we will continue to work hard in both visible and invisible ways to support our Jewish students and faculty members, Johnson told Wednesday Journal.
We're gonna cast some spells. You're not gonna see them.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Visible and invisible ways. They're, they're just taking from the Christian creed, just mocking it too. Right? Do we have another story or is that it?
That's it. We're gonna we gotta actually play it.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
What would have happened if I'd gone for it and just said, no, I'm gay. We got to have a serious dialogue about renaming this segment to just the town from hell.
Well, we know it's Sodom and Gomorrah, Oak Park and River Forest, so pretty close. Bring the sulfuric balls, fiery balls to rain down on these things. Anytime now. Yeah. What else can we promote before we take off?
Trinity Bruin.
Trinity Brewing, our sponsor. I'd also direct people's attention to, I had a new blog post. I shared some intimate facets, let's call them, of a wild dream I had. Some, most middle-aged bald white guys who had their glory, or whose glory days are long behind them, would dream at night of some late 80s, maybe late 90s, probably late 90s, early 2000s supermodel, like Elizabeth Shue or someone like that. But not me. In my dreams, who pops up? Murray Rothbard and Tom Seaver and Oil Can Boyd. Yeah. Well, I share those details. And I shared it with Charlie right away. And I did preface it by saying, I hope we could still remain friends and you don't think I'm ready for the asylum after dreaming of such things.
Yeah.
You could go if you want to read the dark recesses of my anarcho-Catholic capitalist libertarian mind, then you can go and read the latest blog entry entitled I Had a Dream.
Had a dream.
Yes.
Anything else? Buy Gary a beer.
Buy us a beer. Had some nice people buy us beers. It was kind of, well, buy me beers. I didn't share any of them with you, but yeah. And that's about it. Next time we go out, I'll buy.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Until next time, Saints Cajetan, Barnabas, and others pray for us and wish everybody peace. Enjoy your summers out there.
Take care.
Bye.